Hello, and welcome to SCG Global Spin. Your host today is Juan Luis Serrano. Juan Luis is a partner at Sánchez Devanny and head of their Life Sciences Industry Group. We also have Aisha Akilu. Aisha is an associate at Kusamotu Kusamotu and joined the firm in 2020. Additionally, we have Mario Di Stefano. Mario is the managing partner at DSM Avocats à la cour, a firm he founded in 2004. Then we have Susan Stone Rosenfield. Susan is an of counsel at Fennemore Craig, where she focuses her practice on intellectual property. Finally, we have Shireen J. Wilkinson. Shireen is a partner at Wilkinson 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 Chambers and is engaged in litigation general practice.
Welcome everybody to the panel, and I'd like to thank Aisha, Susan, Shireen, and Mario for joining me. The intention of this panel is to talk about some of the most relevant issues within the life sciences on COVID treatment for audiences within SEC. The way we're going to go is we have experts from across different jurisdictions. We have Susan Rosenfield, who's going to be speaking on issues in the US. Mario Di Stefano, who will be speaking on Europe in general terms. Aisha, who is based in Africa, and she will share her country and continent knowledge on these issues. And Shireen Wilkinson and myself will be speaking on the Americas south of the US. So let's start. The first issue that I'd like to talk about is quarantine and travel restrictions. How is your country, and if you could share on a broader scope, on a regional or a continent level, how are travel restrictions at this point going on COVID issues? Susan, please go ahead.
So first of all, we've got the domestic travel issues, the travel within the United States, and then I'll talk about international travel. Domestic travel in the U.S., there are no mandatory restrictions. Although there are restrictions, different states in the U.S. have different rules as to what a traveler coming in from another state must do in terms of some states, for example, will require that the person, the traveler will quarantine him or herself for a period of 7 days or 14 days, but there is no mechanism by which the local governments can enforce that. So it's basically based upon someone's good intentions to actually comply with that. Then as far as international travel goes, essentially U.S. travelers, U.S. permanent residents, legal residents are permitted to leave the U.S. and come back to the U.S. There again is no mandatory quarantine. There's a recommended, or it's quarantine, but again, there's no one that is enforcing that. For travelers coming from other countries who are not U.S. Nationals, if they're coming into the U.S., there's restrictions depending upon what country they're coming from. So right now, a good part of Europe, travelers into the U.S. are prohibited, as well as the UK, the Republic of Ireland, Brazil, China, and Iran. However, there are some exceptions. So, for example, on a personal level, if a family member is a U.S. national, but their family member is not, they can still come in. Also, there are exceptions that people can apply for example, for business reasons. If someone needs to get into the United States from one of the prohibited countries, they can apply for an exemption through the U.S. State Department and Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you. Aisha, could you share a little bit on your jurisdiction?
Here in Nigeria, there's no restriction on domestic travel. Interstate travel, you're free to travel anywhere you want to go to. But it's the international travel. Passengers coming into the country have to undergo a test, at least 96 hours to departure, or 72 hours pre-boarding. And on arrival, they'll have to undergo another test a week later. And if the test proves negative, then they can go out of isolation on the 8th day. But if it's positive, then the guidelines would apply on the treatment. And there's a fine for airlines who don't comply to these guidelines. And when you arrive in the country, you have to isolate for a week. Yes, for a week.
Excellent, thank you. Mario, news from Europe that you can share with us?
Well, let me say I'm located in Luxembourg, which is center of Europe. It's a bit difficult for me to give an overview over all of Europe because it varies from one country to the other. It has to be seen that I think it's a bit like in the United States, the European Commission, which is something like the closest we have to a central government in Europe, in this conglomerate of independent states, it has certain prerogatives in matter of health. For instance, it's competent. The European Health Agency is competent for the licensing and authorization of medicines and medical products like vaccines. But there is no central competency for a common enforcement policy when it comes to fighting against the pandemic, and that includes all kinds of restrictions, lockdowns, and closures of borders. So there has been a variety of measures throughout Europe, especially in February and March, including closure of borders, including curfews and lockdowns. And this has evolved differently in the various countries in Europe. I can say for Luxembourg, from our side, we had no closure of borders. We didn't really have any travel restrictions. We had a lockdown for about 2 months. We had a lockdown, including on real estate construction, for 4 weeks. Currently, we have a curfew from 11 in the evening to 6 in the morning, but the borders are open. Both ways. We had a time in February and March when the Germans, or let's say the German Bundesländer of Saar and Rhineland-Palatinate, closed the borders, at least officially. Belgium closed them, France closed them. So you could still travel across the borders, but you would have to have a reason for that, and as the case may be, a certificate. So like in our firm, we have quite a few cross-border workers who come in from France and Belgium, and also Germany. So I needed to sign a lot of certificates for allowing these people to cross the border to the extent that they actually did come to the office, because obviously with quite a few people working from home. So currently, what we're seeing in Europe is an enforcement of lockdowns, is an increase of lockdowns, a hardening of lockdowns, curfews, closures of schools, of shops, of bars, restaurants, movie theaters, etc. But we, for the time being, it is not really contemplated to close borders. In a specific situation of Luxembourg, it would also be a huge issue, because like 60% at least of the personnel working in the health industry in Luxembourg, specifically in hospitals and care units, come from France, Belgium, and Germany. So a closure of the borders logistically would just not be feasible for us.
Thank you. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be a recurring issue on several of the topics that we're going to address, where some situations will be regulated, I guess, either on a national level for those of us speaking from a specific country, or in your case, from a European level, probably around vaccine approvals and specific treatment approvals. And some other situations will be treated on in either federal, state, or in your case, country by country level. Understood. Shireen, I don't know if you'd like to share a little bit with us on your corner of the world, on the Caribbean.
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys and gals. So Grenada is open for business, and we reopened regionally our airport at August, and we reopened internationally at October. In order to enter Grenada, you must have what is called a pure safe travel certificate. You apply for it online, and this is a certificate that allows you to travel into Grenada, so we won't allow you entry without that certificate. You arrive at Grenada, you are required to quarantine for at least 7 days, and you must produce a negative PCR test that is not more than 72 hours old. That's at Grenada. Permit me, Carlos from TCI, also from Carlos Simons from Miller Simons O'Sullivan, also shared with me what's happening over in TCI. So I'll let you know in terms of their quarantine and travel restrictions. He indicated that TCI is fully open and there's no quarantine required upon arrival, but it remains necessary to produce a negative PCR test, not more than 5 days old. You must wear face masks, and the crowd size and limitations and sanitizing recommendations are all in place.
Thank you. I'll share with the audience a little bit on Mexico, which is where I'm based at, and when I do have information available on countries in the Americas south of Mexico. On travel restrictions, we are very, very tied up to the U.S. on our manufacturing side. So Mexico is not imposed. So we have a land travel restriction with the Mexico-U.S. border for any non-essential activities. So that is limited. Air travel is not restricted. And our restrictions were lifted very quickly on all of the supply and manufacturing chain that is linked to the U.S., on the automotive, on the aerospace industries, where those were deemed essential activities pretty much right off the bat. They never closed up. I do know that some countries south of us have had, for example, so Costa Rica comes to mind, Colombia comes to mind, have had a bit more higher restrictions. Whether this is good or bad, we are currently not doing great on any chart on people who have gotten the illness or people who have died from it. But that's the situation right now. Let's switch things over more to a regulatory / public healthcare side. Let's talk about testing. So the question, there are two general questions I will ask each of our panelists to give us a very short overall view on how testing is done where you are sitting, and B, which legal inquiries have come up, which legal questions have clients asked of you on surrounding testing, mostly for clients in the life sciences space. So again, pass the mic on to Susan, if you can share with us the U.S. perspective.
So in the U.S., unfortunately, there's not a consistent test to use or a consistent testing availability. The states, the individual states are generally the ones that are administering the tests, or in certain instances, the local governments. So the municipalities, such as the city, might be in the state of Arizona here, we have many Native American tribes that have their own governments. Although we receive tests from the federal government, who actually administers it will vary from state to state, and which test will vary from state to state. They can be administered. We have situations where they have drive-through testing, where people in their cars line up, and there's been instances in certain states where there are literally hundreds of cars lined up of people waiting to get tested. We've had, in some instances, shortages of tests. It seems to vary week by week. anecdotally, I've seen situations where people have been, in my state, unable to obtain a test for 2 weeks, and then the following week there's plenty available. In terms of things that are important for employers, for our clients, questions that we're getting are, can we test our employees for COVID, or can we require a test for our employees for COVID before permitting them to enter the workspace? The answer is yes, probably. The federal government, our Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, sorry about that, has issued guidance to employers to say that, yeah, you can require that that employees be tested or show a negative test before they're permitted into the workplace. But basically they have to show, the employer has to show that it's a business necessity, which I think is getting a relatively broad interpretation, given the fact that if your entire workforce catches COVID and is unable to work, so you have a large percentage of your workforce out, there is, that's arguably quite a business necessity to be able to screen to prevent people with who are contagious from entering into the particular business location.
So a couple of questions which may come up in conversation with clients. How's the approval process going for tests with the U.S.? I don't know what you could share on that. Has it been quick enough? Are companies able to import tests into the U.S.? Are they able to export samples for testing in other countries? Is there an obligation to report test results? I don't know if you could share a bit on that side.
Yeah, my understanding is that the U.S. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, who is the branch of our federal or the agency in our federal government that approves tests, has been relatively lax in terms of what they're permitting for tests. So because there's such a, there's a need for these tests to be up and able to be used by the population, they've been a little bit more lax in requiring sufficient testing to make sure that the tests actually work. So at least for, I would say, the first half of the pandemic, there was a lot of questions as to the accuracy of certain tests, just by virtue of whether those specific tests work. And then add that, of course, to the question of when the test is administered, whether a person is actually going to show signs. Do they have sufficient whatever the diagnostic test is looking for, does the patient have sufficient amount of whatever they're testing? So, and then there's a lot of course, concern as to, we don't really know exactly when it's contagious or not. In terms of, I'm sorry, what was your other question?
So the other question is import and export of samples and laboratory results from elsewhere. So, and I'll share with the audience, we've had inquiries from companies wanting to. So Mexico's a big market. We've got a lot of people in the country. So we've got a couple of inquiries from clients on companies wanting to bring in testing kits where samples would be tested outside of Mexico, so laboratories would not be here. And they were inquiring on issues such as, the import-export of those tests, privacy considerations, regulatory considerations, reporting obligations, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out that in our case, Mexican government has tried to keep a very tight control on who gets a test approved. Anybody who gets a test approved and performs the test has to report it to the government so they can have control over the pandemic. And the government is actually not administering a lot of tests. So that's been one of the issues. It's not been as big a market as some people expected. I don't know if you could share a little bit on that. And that will be a question for the rest of the folks in the panel.
Well, certainly there's a requirement for positive test results to be reported to the local government, which in turn then reports it to the state government, which then in turn reports it to the federal government. So it's almost real time data statistics dashboards that are up so we can see the testing. There's usually several day lag, but it's there. But those test results are disassociated with the individual identity of the patients, for privacy reasons, and there's not really an ability because of that to do contact tracing, which could be a very big benefit from something to do with your positive test results. I'm not aware of there being an issue of test specimens being sent outside the country. I believe that they're being analyzed within the U.S. There have, in terms of the timing, though, it's been an issue of how long it takes to get results. It can take anywhere from 24 hours to, I've heard it take as long as 7 or 10 days for people to get results, which in my opinion sort of negates the the benefit of testing.
Excellent. Thank you. Aisha, could you share with us a little bit on legal considerations surrounding testing in Nigeria, please?
Actually, before a person can get tested, you have to show signs, a fever or any of the symptoms of the COVID. So if a patient has any of those symptoms, then you could go for testing. But the government actually controls the whole testing thing. It's in conjunction with the Center for Disease Control and the state ministries of health. So in the beginning of the pandemic, the testing were quite slow. We're having like 200 tests a day, and for a nation of almost 200 million, that was quite on the low side. So we had to get the private sector to collaborate with the Center for Disease Control and the government to create more awareness and more testing, mobile testing, and have to introduce the private labs to also test. And that increased the testing tremendously.
Has it been a big business opportunity for private labs to import test kits and do those laboratory analysis within the country, or has it been an import-export situation?
No, I'm not aware of any export situation.
Okay.
The testing are usually done, yes, within Nigeria.
Excellent. Mario, I don't know if you can share with us a little bit on Luxembourg and Europe in general.
Yes, again, I mean, from a Luxembourg perspective, we're pretty good with testing. Luxembourg is the country in Europe, even the world, that has done the most extensive number of testing as compared to the population. We have basically had something like 1.4 million tests done for about 600,000 inhabitants. That basically means statistically we have done more than 2 tests already per inhabitant. So that would be like 220,000 tests per 100,000 inhabitants, which is quite a lot in international comparison, but Luxembourg had decided quite early that they would do large screen testing organized by the health ministry. And this is, of course, to a certain extent outsourced to a private lab. But there is a system by which the citizens will be invited by normal mail to register on the website and to book a slot in a testing center. They normally are drive-through or walk-through centers outdoors. And then you will receive your results usually within less than 24 hours. So that's quite well organized. What we see in neighboring countries that it takes much longer, and that the scale of testing is not quite as extensive. But that also depends on the availability of tests. Luxembourg has purchased a large number of tests, was able to secure a large number of tests, which maybe is a bit easier for a small country because the absolute numbers are not really comparable to bigger countries like Germany or France or even Belgium. And the testing is also available to cross-border workers who work in Luxembourg, so it's not limited to Luxembourg residents. Apart from the large screen testing organized by the government, you can also get testing in private laboratories. And there as well, you usually have the result within less than 24 hours. Again, the situation is not exactly the same in all of the European countries. It's more difficult in some countries to get a test. Some countries you will have to have a symptom. You will have to have symptoms in order to get a prescription to be tested, which in Luxembourg is not the case. And the availability of tests may also be more restricted in other countries, even though you will have the same tests which are legally marketable all over Europe, and there's a limited oversight over the market introduction of the test. I mean, there's probably like more than 100 tests on the market, and the situation will change in 2022 when the existing European directive will be amended, and then there will be a stricter regulatory oversight on the market introduction of testing. Right now, it's basically a matter of choice by the government, respectively the labs, which tests they want to use and which tests they deem to be reliable. We have the discussion right now on introduction of quick testing, which is a sort of next big thing, I think, all over the world. But there still are some doubts on the reliability. Some of them appear to be less reliable. But that's something that the practice will show how this will impact on the management of the crisis.
One question, and it touches on one of the points that you mentioned. Is regulatory approval of tests done at a European level, or do you still have to go through a country-specific approval?
Normally, it's a country-specific approval, but as I said, the tests, the approval procedure is pretty light for the time being until the new directive will be in place. But of course, I mean, there is it's medical devices, and there is it's under the European 1997 directive, and so the safety of the test will have to be consistent with the standards under European law.
European standards, excellent. Thank you, Mario. Shireen, could you share with us a little bit on testing?
Yes, so let me start off again by indicating what we've heard out of our colleagues at the Turks and Caicos. They've indicated that testing in the TCI is ongoing, and the islands have been provided with anti-testing kits from the United Kingdom. Testing is available free of charge at government or government-associated medical facilities, and at private medical facilities and labs, you can get tests done at cost. TCI also indicates that they've not experienced any major legal issues in the processing. For us here at Grenada, testing is ongoing, and it's provided at our general hospital and at two private hospitals. One is the main private hospital, and one is our university, which has a teaching hospital. Our sister island, Carriacou, testing is also done at the hospital there. But our testing kits have been a mixture of purchase and donated kits. none of our testing facilities offer free tests at all. The tests at the general hospital and at the hospital in Carriacou tend to be a little bit less expensive than at the private facilities. In fact, I'll disclose, I was tested today because of the risk of possible exposure at the office between last week and this week. And I was offered one test at 450 EC dollars versus the other test at 650 EC dollars. I should get my results back either later today. I was tested around 11 a.m. our time, which is 10 a.m. on the East Coast in the US. I should get my test back either later today or early tomorrow. So the testing is quite rapid, or the testing procedure in terms of results coming back is quite rapid. And in fact, due to the spike that I mentioned in the earlier piece, there's been an overwhelming demand by individuals such as myself for tests to be conducted in the event of possible exposure to an infected person. So it's just a matter of being safe, I suppose. We've not had any issues, we at Grenada, and certainly at the firm, as far as I'm aware, we've not had any legal issues arising. And we've gotten some inquiries from businesses operating at Grenada. For example, one of our clients is a major airline, and they inquired as to whether or not, when they were allowed to fly back into Grenada, whether or not they could, as Susan was saying, demand that their employees be tested. It was a question, I want to say it was just a question that was thrown out in the event that they felt it necessary, but they did not follow up on it. And it's not been a mandatory requirement that employers test their employees. The requirement is that the legal requirement is that if an employee feels ill, if anybody feels ill, that you immediately get yourself tested, or you will be tested forcibly. So that's where we are with testing, but we've not seen any legal issues arising out of it.
So that's great that you touch on that. My guess is that we'll see an increase on legal inquiries surrounding testing. So even when vaccines, and we'll go into vaccines for our next round of questions, but even when vaccines do come around, there's still going to be a need for testing. So there's still going to be companies doing business around testing. There's still going to be governments trying to develop their own tests or purchasing testing kits from other governments. And there will be legal issues around that, much more than we've seen up to date in the past. And I can give you a couple of examples. We know, because we've advised on this, for some companies in the US that are offering big multinational clients the possibility to test their employees in several jurisdictions. So they give our client a single price where the same test kit will arrive at the house or at the office of their employee anywhere that they sit in the world. All tests will be conducted in their laboratory in the US, and then results will be given both to the company and to the employer. A lot of the legal issues surround that, as you can imagine. So the way the advice has been going is through set questionnaires that are intended to be responded by several different jurisdictions. And my guess is that this is going to keep on going. We are living a new legal reality surrounding this illness and this pandemic, and that's going to keep us busy and thinking about these type of legal situations. Both from labor law, from a regulatory law, from a privacy law, from a general constitutional level right to health law perspective. I'd like to go next into some good news, vaccinations, and please let's try to keep the discussion around legal issues. So I'll ask each one of our panelists to give just a very brief oversight on what is expected to happen, and then if you could elaborate a bit more on legal issues that may come up. Susan, let's start with you. We do know that there have been some approvals. Of course, the U.S. is first and foremost, both in research and in being a standard for approval of vaccines. more likely more than one vaccine will be approved and more than one vaccine will be necessary. So I don't know what you can share with us on this side.
So the first dosage of the vaccine are going to go to the healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, janitors, people who are working in hospital environments, nursing homes, et cetera. And also to frontline workers, the police, emergency medical technicians, firemen. And then the notion is that it will then go to individuals who are at higher risk due to either underlying medical conditions or to their age. And the hope is that at some point, everyone will have an opportunity to have the vaccine. Right now, they believe that 2 dosages about 3 weeks apart are going to be required for this. So, it's not yet for businesses. It's not yet, unless you're in the healthcare industry, it's not yet a possibility to wholesale have all of your employees vaccinated. And there are, of course, still some questions about this vaccination based upon clinical studies that were done on an abbreviated basis, of course, in the UK and other countries. So, but as you mentioned, there are other vaccines that are in the process of being developed. So it's unclear what single vaccine or several vaccines will be the quote unquote magic bullet, the thing that really takes effect. So then, of course, the big legal question will be, are employers able to force their employees to take the vaccine as a condition of their employment? I think the answer is going to be, with very few, if any, exceptions, the answer is going to be yes, that an employer can require as the condition of employment that the employee be vaccinated. And the reason is because, as we mentioned a little bit earlier in this discussion, that in order for an employer to be able to, in the US, to be able to require a vaccination, it has to be consistent with the necessity of the business. And with COVID, it is very easy to make a case that preventing the spread amongst the entire workforce is a business necessity.
So, do you think businesses will be able to procure their own vaccines to administer, or will they be, asking employees to go to their regular healthcare facility?
Well, I think it will depend upon the size of the employer. In the US, large employers, and by large, I mean anywhere from usually 500 employees and above, they often have, for the flu vaccine, often have a clinic on their premises on a certain day where employees can easily come down and get the vaccination. They're not required to, but they can. But for smaller employers, they will probably send their workers to go either to the workers' doctors, to public health clinics, wherever the vaccine is going to be provided. In fact, in the United States right now, pharmacies, so retail stores that sell pharmaceuticals and shampoo and things like that, essentially the large companies that that own these chains of stores, such as CVS, Walgreens, those are common here in the US, are actually requiring that their pharmacists administer flu vaccinations, COVID testing, and it is believed that they'll also be required to administer COVID vaccinations as a way of disseminating it to the public. One thing I didn't mention when we were talking about the testing is that in the U.S., testing has been free. The government is subsidizing testing, and I don't know whether it will be the same way for the vaccination, but I suspect that it will be also given without cost to individuals.
Thank you. Let's go to Aisha, please, on legal issues surrounding vaccines in Nigeria.
Right now, we don't have any vaccines, but we should be expecting some by January, end of January. And any legal issues? Not really. The vaccines are, when available, the frontline workers will be the first in line to get them, then the elderly and the vulnerable, then the rest of the population can get them.
Is it all going to be administered by the government, or do you expect a private market to be present on vaccination as well?
No, right now it's the government handling the whole vaccination. Maybe after a while, yes, then private individuals can start.
So there have been some experiences in Africa on the usage of several international treaty provisions to guarantee access, quicker access. And I'm thinking, HIV drugs, that type of life sciences consideration. Do you think this is going to be relevant on supply of vaccines for African countries, the usage of these the patent-related provisions in international treaties where compulsory licenses or automatic approvals take place?
Well, the vaccine has to undergo testing by the Agency for Food and Drug Control, and once it's proven to be safe and effective, then that'll be it. It will be administered to the population.
So, excellent. My guess is that we will be seeing some issues where patent situations will come up, where smaller countries will be looking at securing some form of compulsory licenses. It's going to depend a lot on availability in general and the possibility to replicate one or more of the vaccines. I do think that provisions in international treaties surrounding these issues were meant precisely to address situations of this nature. And those of us who aside from life sciences, do have colleagues in our firms or do work directly surrounding IP may face inquiries on these situations. Excellent. Thank you, Aisha. Let's go to Mario on vaccination in Luxembourg. And this is certainly one issue where the European Commission will have relevance, at least on the approval.
It's not exactly Commission, specifically it's the European
the Medicines Agency.
Medicines Agency, EMA, and so far vaccines have been tested, but they have not been authorized yet. It's expected that the authorization on the European level that will basically enable the deployment of the vaccine throughout Europe, depending on availability, of course, will at least for some of the vaccines will be affected before Christmas, hopefully. So in Luxembourg and Germany, just to name them, it is expected that the effective vaccination will start towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. The actual facilities to do vaccines on a large scale are already being put in place. And what's lacking for the time being is the vaccine as such. But they're apparently speeding up their procedure as fast as they can. But again, it's on a European level, so there will be an authorization that will cover all of the European Union. And then there will be, because that is not a centralized, there's no centralized regulation on that, then every country will have to look for supplies. Of course, the European Commission may try to coordinate these efforts, but we had the same issue with masks and other protective gear, where It was everybody was on their own to start with. Maybe we'll see more of a coordination this time. We hope for that. Now, legal issues, of course. Will the vaccine be compulsory on a legal level? No, for the time being. In practically all European countries, that is not intended, because that would probably create a huge backlash.
Let me ask you right there. I understand that it will not be compulsory from, if I am a European national and the government will not force me to vaccinate. But going back to Susan's point, will an employer be able, or do you think an employer will an employer be able to force or to mandate his or her employees to actually get vaccinated?
Yeah, I was coming to that. I mean, again, technically, it's not impossible that some European countries could render the vaccine compulsory, because, like, there are some countries where you have certain vaccines that are compulsory, but in majority of European countries, any vaccine basically is on a voluntary basis, even though there might be campaigns to promote vaccination throughout the population. On the individual level of an employer, there is no real case law yet here. The general tendency among lawyers is that no, an employer will not be able to force members of staff to be vaccinated, even if they may be like frontline workers. It's something that's currently under debate among the authorities, health ministry, the hospitals, and also the employers associations. So far, there is no strict guideline. So the answer for the time being is no. But we're going to see how this evolves, and that will depend a little bit also on how people will respond to calls that will be made and are already made for vaccination on the one side, and campaigns of anti-vax activists on the other side. Now, the German Minister of Health has made a forecast, which is maybe even rather optimistic, and said, well, if all goes well, we can have about 60% of the population vaccinated by the end of summer. We're going to see how that turns out, but obviously the success of the vaccine will depend to a large measure on how many people will actually get vaccinated on a voluntary basis. That's one thing, and how long the vaccines will actually give you immunity, because this is also a question that is not entirely solved yet, it appears, on a scientific level.
Yeah, that's actually going to be replicated on several countries and several jurisdictions. Shireen, can you share with us a little bit? Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, sure. So in discussions with senior doctors on the island, and also from reports from our Ministry of Health, we were advised that Grenada is among the list of countries, among the list of the International Development Association countries that will receive the vaccine free of cost. Now, that's a whole different story from the administration of the vaccine, but getting the actual vaccine, we are on that list to receive it free. And the IDA, the International Development Association, is a part of the World Bank that helps the world's poorest countries. Now, we don't like to think of ourselves as poor, but you know what? In this situation, we'll take that designation. It's okay. Whichever vaccine is recommended for us, whether it be the Pfizer, the Moderna, whoever else is coming on stream, we're hoping that it's going to be available by March or April of 2021. So it's optimistic for spring, even though we don't have seasons at Grenada, but spring 2021. And some countries, including Grenada, we've made advance applications for delivery. So we're hopeful that delivery will be available by February 2021. And in preparation for the rollout of the vaccine, the Ministry of Health officials have indicated that frontline workers will be the priority persons to get the vaccine. Thereafter, followed by the more vulnerable persons with underlying conditions, the elderly, persons in care homes, and then to the general population. I'm going to say something that I hope it's not controversial to any of our colleagues. Grenada is a very religious country. So there's been great debate about forcing persons to take a vaccine, because there's certainly some groups of certain religious, or who hold certain religious views that do not believe in vaccines. And so therefore it would be difficult for an employer who has an employee of that particular faith or of certain faiths to say to them, your job is in danger if you don't take a vaccine. You're begging for that person to go to what we call our labor commissioner and lodge a complaint against you. So like Mario, I don't know, well, we certainly have no case law in that area, and it's of course an emerging area where you have to force somebody to do something to maintain their job. I don't know what a legal case, what a case would look like to try to force an employee to take the vaccination.
Thank you. And this is understandable. This is something that will come up on legal analysis on several jurisdictions, where you have on the one side public health considerations, and on the other side individual rights, and where those end up, rights over one's own body, non-discrimination rights. If this was 2019 and somebody asked me, hey, can you ask somebody who is your employee if their religion allows them to get vaccinated or not? I would say no, because you as an employer really shouldn't be asking people what their religions are, because you could be liable for discrimination. I'd like to share a couple of additional issues that will be relevant, that will come up for those of us who are specializing in life sciences. I used to work for one of the large multinational pharmaceutical companies. And the way they are thinking about this and they are addressing it is they are joining up several functions within the company. They're joining up their, supply experts. They're joining up their government affairs. They're joining up their communications and reputational issues, because what you have in a vaccine is a product, right? And what you have within that product is a very big market, which is comprised of governments mostly. And in other cases, it will be comprised of individuals within a country or companies within a country who are interested in your product. So you can't just take your decisions on what price to sell it and who to sell it based on economic considerations, because then you may have either reputational issues or government affairs issues. So you have to balance all of these situations. My guess is that what will come up to us who are advising either one of the large companies who are manufacturing these vaccines, either isolated or in conjunction with other companies, or B, a whole bunch of companies who are interested in knowing that their employees will be safe, are precisely, will the government be administering it? Can I buy it as an employer? Can I make my employees show me evidence that they were vaccinated or not? What can I do to keep my workforce safe, or my employment environment safe? How is approval going? I can tell you, for example, in Mexico, the government came out and said there will be no private distribution available for the vaccines whatsoever. So nobody in the private sector will be able to buy it, not hospitals, not clinics, and certainly not companies for their workforce. What this has generated is, as you can imagine, a lot of political noise around it, saying, well, it's just a government trying to control it so they can use it for their own benefit and electoral purposes, et cetera, et cetera. That's probably going to come up in other jurisdictions, and there will be companies interested in legal issues surrounding that. So that's going to be food for thought for us in the life sciences space as far as how this goes. Let's move on to our final topic, which is treatment. And I would like to divide the questions on two main aspects. Number one is, we have seen in our corner of the world, in Mexico and in general Latin America, a lot of garbage miracle products being advertised, sometimes just through, word of mouth, social media, et cetera, means other times through different channels that have a wider impact. And I'll start on this one. We actually had our Minister of the Interior, who is a former Supreme Court justice. So as you can imagine, she reports directly to the president. She's a very big personality. She has a very high-ranking position within the Mexican government. She was promoting a garbage miracle treatment of nano citrus something, saying that she could not get COVID because of that. And she came out, on a press conference saying everybody should be getting this, promoting that, which was a health hazard. And there have been a lot of other examples. Our Senate was actually calling for an open discussion on another miracle product that's not approved that one senator was saying was great for COVID, was not tested or anything. And that actually had to be stopped directly by the Minister of Health. So there have been issues surrounding legal risks for either companies who are selling these trash products or companies who have employers who may be subjected to these type of frauds. So I'd like to start on the treatment issue on these garbage products or miracle products, however you want to address them, and ask the panelists if you could share if that's been going on in your jurisdiction very briefly and what the authorities have been doing about it. Susan, please.
Of course, you've probably heard that our outgoing president has for some time now been touting all sorts of well, I shouldn't say all sorts. He has touted certain pharmaceuticals as being the miracle cure. And there's not much that anyone can do to stop him from tweeting this. There have been advisors trying to get him to stop doing that. So there's not much that we can do about that. However, there are also, as you alluded to, Juan, there's also very many miracle cures being marketed by companies and private individuals. And those are being addressed, and legal action is being taken against them. Our U.S. FDA, our Food and Drug Administration, and our FTC, which is our Federal Trade Commission, both have the authority to go after companies and individuals who are touting cures that do not have basis in reality and science. So, and that is an ongoing thing. Also, each state has the ability to also go after individuals and companies, not necessarily even within their state, but that are offering products in their state that could be damaging. And of course, with the internet, many attorney generals can do things to prevent and stop the offering of these false cures. So that's we are seeing that, and they are being addressed, and I'm hopeful that in mid-January that we will not be hearing these spurious medical claims from our government officials any longer.
Thank you, Susan. Aisha?
Here we have they're called herbal medicines, and the Agency for Food and Drug, they have to regulate them and test them to know if they're safe for consumption, and most of them hardly pass these tests. So if they don't pass this test and they're in circulation, then the agency goes after them and shuts down their business. So it's illegal to peddle these herbal medicines as a cure.
Understood. Has the agency been successful in stopping them? Because what we've seen in our side is a lot of uptick on different companies just coming up out of the blue trying to sell these miracle products. It has been a big issue here in Mexico. And it has been tough for authorities to control it because you need some physical form of control. You need, officers and examiners to go and visit facilities, and circulation of people is limited. So
it's actually been successful here.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. Mario, you're up.
Well, yeah, miracle cure. Everybody would like to have one, and nobody's really all that sure about what they have and what they don't have. So I think the experience that the various health administrations and hospitals have had so far throughout the world is that some stuff works better than other stuff and works better for specific people rather than others. This might depend on the specific predispositions of a person. This might also have to do with a particular strain of the virus. We're lawyers. I mean, what do we know? We can just sort of watch what is happening. From a legal standpoint, obviously, any product that's marketed without proper licensing and proper authorization, and maybe also given to a patient outside of the indication for which it was designed, may lead to a liability for defective products. Praising a miracle product that isn't one may be of course fraudulent and may also have liability and also criminal liability issues. That having been said, obviously everybody's looking for something that will work, and there have been numerous products that have been tested that have been developed maybe for even something completely different, and that but where there are certain promising first studies saying, well, it helps, at least for certain people in certain stadiums of illness, it does help. But these products are not authorized for that specific use for COVID. And there is a Article 5 of the European Directive of 6 November 2001, which is Directive 2001/83, on the community code relating to medicinal products for human use, that permits an emergency authorization for the use of a medicinal product outside of the use it was originally designed for. Again, it's an emergency, it's a provisional procedure, and it will normally enable for those professionals, health professionals that will administer such treatment to be released from liability for that emergency use. So that is something that is currently used for a certain number of products. They're tested, they're tried, and this emergency use would be done under Article 5 of the 2001 directive.
Thank you. Excellent. Shireen?
Our answer is very simple. We're like TCI. We don't have the issue with untested and unapproved miracle cures. I'll share a joke if I can. I mean, these West Indian islands, it's our citizens, we drink rum. So, that'll cure anything. It'll kill your liver, but it'll cure you.
Not anything. Probably a couple of things, Shireen. On more formal treatments that will be approved by regulatory agencies, I'd like for the panelists just to close up talking about some legal issues that may come up. And we've had a couple of them. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In our firm, we do a lot of practice around life sciences, IP, and the crossover between both. So what we're seeing is, for example, we've already seen a couple of applications of existing products that are being subject to patent applications for a new indication, where our clients feel that product may be useful to treat COVID in its different stages. They haven't finished, of course, all the clinical trials sufficient, but necessary to prove that. But when they start, they want to secure that patent application if they have, enough evidence on that, so that they will have that IP angle protected. With that IP angle, of course, comes the concern for eventually, when a product gets approved, will there be compulsory licensing issues come up in different jurisdictions throughout the world to get that eventual treatment, whichever it is, manufactured locally or manufactured in other places in the world that have large capacities to manufacture that, and to get lower prices surrounding the drug. The other issue that will come up is, again, will the government be in your region controlling acquiring of eventual approved treatments and distributing it, or will private sector and out-of-pocket expenses be allowed for companies and for nationals within your country? So these are just three ideas of issues that will come up and that will run through our desks eventually as lawyers surrounding treatment. I don't know if you could close up with comments on these aspects. Susan, please.
As far as the the patenting new indications, new applications for existing compounds or compositions, I think the best course of action, the most likely chance of success is when they don't know for certain whether it's going to actually be effective as they think it's going to be, is you throw in as much like laboratory data, animal data, as much preliminary human data if you have any, and you hope that if it turns out through further developments that it actually is effective, then you hope that your patent application will stand up, be strong enough that you'll get a patent on it. That's just sort of a general patent view of it, patent attorney's view of it. As far as compulsory licensing, in the US, at least as the US government can step in certain situations and demand basically a compulsory license. That almost never has actually happened. It's very, very, very rare. So even if, for example, a lot of U.S. government funds go into universities and into public and private institutions whereby technology is developed, even though under the federal law, the use of those funds by organizations to develop testing and vaccines and treatments, even though the US government has the right to go in and basically take that from those who developed it, it really very rarely happens. Our government is fairly smart in that way, that they understand that they're not very good at making these things. So there's and with COVID, just as we've seen so far, I think there's going to be a continuing public-private cooperation to develop things.
That's great that you touch on that. My guess is that it will at least be thought of or discussed, because this is, a once in a lifetime situation. And probably from a U.S. perspective, U.S. companies will not be so worried about compulsory licensing for the U.S. market, but they will be worried for compulsory licensing considerations for their IP in other parts of the world. And again, it's going to come down to availability, pricing, and local manufacturing capacities, and also how easy it'll be to actually replicate with a compulsory license to actually replicate a clinical trial. My guess is that whenever clinical trials are continued and improved, et cetera, the market and the need for effective treatments, much as in vaccines, will be a lot larger than what one company can address. So I'm quite sure that these discussions will come up for several different jurisdictions, and that local governments in non-US countries will be thinking about, is it something where I want to push for a compulsory licensing right under whatever international treaties or just general WHO provisions there are. So yeah, that's certainly gonna come up.
I agree.
Yeah, Aisha, could you share with us your perspective on this?
As Susan said, because the COVID is it's a new thing. So as it goes further, then new rules and regulations come up, and then that would govern the whole issue. So right now we don't really have anything in place for such, and we just we just take it as it comes. Each day we have new rules and laws governing them. So.
Understood. That's going to be similar for all of us. What will happen eventually is that somebody will come up with strong test results saying, hey, my product, either this new product that I developed or this product that has already existed for years and years, works for COVID. So when you're just starting to get symptoms, you can take my product, which was similar to what happened with the flu pandemic. When you're starting to get that, then you can take this. And governments will want to have supply. A single company or several companies will probably not be able to supply that in general terms to the whole world. So my guess is local agencies, local governments will be looking at alternatives for, either if there's a patent surrounding it, compulsory licensing, can I bring it from somebody else? Which are the companies available, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, that would be possible because when you do that, then you'll have to undergo clinical trials in phases to determine the safety and effectiveness. Then it can be rolled out to the public.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Mario, could you give us your thoughts on this?
Well, obviously, I mean, there might be a battle for market shares. There may be regional differences because some of the vaccines, for instance, or not vaccines, but the same may apply to treatments, require special treatment for storage and transportation. Like some of the vaccines apparently need to be stored at -70 or -80 degrees Celsius. We have a company in Luxembourg apparently that nobody really heard about before here. That is one of the leaders in the manufacturing of low temperature fridges, and they appear to do pretty well in the current environment. So because there's a big request for demand for this kind of product. On the other hand, I agree. I mean, there's going to be a battle for distribution of available vaccines and treatment because everybody will need treatments, everybody will need vaccines, and the production will most likely not be able to cope with the demand for quite a long time. So there will be contractual disputes, there may be patent and licensing disputes, there may be import-export pricing issues. In Luxembourg, the medical sector is pretty it's pretty much run by the state. There's no private clinics really, with one historical exception. The whole sector, like most European countries, is pretty much controlled by the state agencies, both with respect to the authorization, but that really goes up to the EMA, but also with respect to the actual distribution networks for the wholesalers. So you cannot distribute medical products any way you want them. I mean, it's a pretty strict distribution network and rules on distribution networks. Same applies on treatments. And as I said, we will probably have other treatments that will be, in the meantime, undergoing the regular authorization procedures. For the time being, practically all the treatments that we are going to see, apparently, apart from let's say auxiliary treatments, which basically do tackle with some of the major issues like anticoagulants, which in the beginning wasn't really has not really been seen as essential, and the actual treatment has improved greatly in administering those among other products. But typically, the more specific medical products that are used right now have been authorized or are under test under the emergency procedures.
Excellent. Yeah, that's going to be an evolving legal issue. What the legal questions surrounding health regulations in general started when the pandemic first hit, and they're going to develop. So my guess is it's going to be a while till we have all of those questions answered, and there's going to be a lot of cases and of inquiries from clients, and there's going to be a lot of cases brought up, either litigation between companies or from individuals or companies against governments surrounding available treatments when they do become available. So that's going to keep us busy for a while now. Shireen, could you share with us a little bit?
I just want to I want to tag on to what Aisha and Susan were saying. I know our legal process, it's ongoing. So we've had to learn every day, and our rules and regulations or major piece of legislation, that changes literally every day or every 2 days as the pandemic unfolds, whether it be in relation to the actual vaccine, or it be in relation to quarantine regulations or opening of businesses or whatever. So that unfolds every day. It will be ongoing as well in terms of the vaccine and treatment. And I think from our side, and from what I can see from the TCI side, from our side, it will be an issue of cost and education. And from the TCI, it will just be an issue of rollout, and hopefully all of us getting back to the business, at least here in the Caribbean, of being safe, warm, friendly, healthy destinations.
Excellent. So that's it. I'd like to thank all of you guys for your time. I'd like to thank SGC Legal, specifically Kate and Diane, for putting this together, and the great crew that they have here there for recording. Stay safe, everyone, and let's keep the conversation going.
And that concludes our recording. Thank you for joining us today. You can find this and many other episodes at scgglobalspin.com.